The scream never left her throat. Mia Ellison stood frozen behind the dessert table, her tray shaking in her hands, watching a woman in a silver gown tip a small vial into the cream frosting of a cake meant for the most dangerous man in the room. Her heart slammed against her ribs so hard she thought everyone could hear it. She had exactly one chance to do something, and if she chose wrong, she might not walk out of this ballroom alive. The gala had started like any other night of forced smiles and clenched jaws. Mia had taken the catering job because rent was due, and her regular shifts at the diner weren't covering it anymore. The agency told her it was a private event for someone important. They didn't say the someone important was Damian Cross, the Alpha King who ruled over 3 territories, and was rumored to be able to break a man's arm with 2 fingers if he felt like it. She had been warned the moment she walked through the service entrance. An older waiter named Oliver had pulled her aside, his voice low and urgent. "Keep your eyes down," he had said. "Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't look him in the eyes. If he asks you something, answer fast and answer quiet, then step back. You understand?" Mia had nodded, even though nothing about it made sense to her. She had grown up in a small town where the biggest danger was an angry customer who didn't tip. She didn't know anything about wolves or kings or the strange hierarchy that ran underneath the surface of the world she thought she knew. All she understood was that the man everyone in this room feared was sitting at the head table less than 30 feet away, laughing quietly at something one of his advisors had said, completely unaware that his life was about to change. The ballroom itself was staggering. Marble floors polished so bright they mirrored the chandeliers above. Ice sculptures shaped like wolves stood on pedestals near the windows, slowly weeping into silver trays as the night wore on. Musicians played something slow and elegant in the corner, and waitstaff moved between round tables carrying trays of food that cost more than Mia made in a month. She had been assigned to the dessert station, a quiet corner near the back where a 5-tier cake sat waiting to be cut at the end of the night. It was iced in pale gold, decorated with sugar flowers that looked almost real, and it had been made specifically for Damian Cross to share with his intended bride, a woman named Camille Winter. Camille was, by every account whispered among the staff, going to be the next Alpha Queen. She was beautiful in a sharp, deliberate way, with dark hair pulled into a tight knot, and eyes the color of frozen lake water. She moved through the crowd like she already owned it, greeting guests with practiced warmth that never quite reached past her mouth. Mia had noticed her earlier in the evening, gliding from table to table, accepting congratulations with a small, satisfied smile. It was almost 10 in the evening when Mia noticed something odd. Camille had drifted toward the dessert table alone, waving off the 2 guards who usually trailed behind her. She told them she wanted a private moment to check the cake before it was presented to her future husband. The guards, trusting her completely, stepped back and gave her space. Mia had been standing only a few feet away, refilling a tray of chocolate truffles, and she almost didn't notice at first. But something about the way Camille moved caught her attention. It wasn't the movement of someone admiring a cake. It was quick, practiced, almost mechanical. Camille reached into the small clutch purse she carried and pulled out a thin glass vial filled with a cloudy liquid. She unscrewed the cap without hesitation and poured it directly into a groove she had carved into the top layer of frosting, then smoothed the icing back over with a small knife so no one would ever know it had been touched. Mia's breath caught in her chest. For a moment she told herself she had imagined it, that it was some kind of decoration, a food coloring or a flavor extract used in fancy desserts. But the way Camille's eyes darted around the room afterward, checking to see if anyone had watched her, told a different story. This wasn't decoration. This was something done in secret, something meant to stay hidden. Camille turned and caught Mia staring. For one terrible second, neither of them moved. Camille's expression shifted from calm to ice cold in the space of a heartbeat, and she crossed the distance between them with slow, deliberate steps, her heels clicking against the marble like a countdown. "You saw nothing," Camille said quietly, her voice pleasant on the surface but sharp underneath, like silk wrapped around a blade. "Do you understand me? You are staff. You are invisible. People like you do not exist in rooms like this unless someone chooses to look at you. And I promise you, you do not want me to choose to look at you again." Mia's mouth went dry. She managed a small nod, and Camille smiled the kind of smile that didn't touch her eyes at all, then turned and walked away, as if nothing had happened, disappearing back into the crowd of guests near the dance floor. For several minutes, Mia stood rooted to the spot, her hands trembling so badly she nearly dropped the tray of truffles. She told herself it wasn't her business. She told herself that whatever happened between the Alpha King and his future queen was not something a waitress from a small-town diner should involve herself in. She had rent to pay and a job to keep, and speaking up could cost her both, or worse. But the more she tried to convince herself to stay quiet, The louder a small voice inside her grew, insisting that if she said nothing, and something terrible happened to that man, she would carry the weight of it for the rest of her life. She glanced toward the head table. Damien Cross sat with his broad shoulders relaxed against the back of an ornate chair, a glass of dark red wine in front of him, untouched. He wasn't what she expected. She had pictured someone cold and cruel, someone who matched the terrifying stories the staff had whispered about him all night. Instead, he looked almost bored, his sharp jaw set in quiet patience as an older man beside him droned on about trade agreements between territories. His dark hair was cut close at the sides, his eyes a deep amber that seemed to catch the candlelight whenever he turned his head. There was an unmistakable presence to him, something that made the air around him feel heavier, like gravity bent slightly in his direction. Even sitting still, he looked like someone who could end a conversation, a career, or a life with a single word. Mia's stomach twisted painfully. She thought about walking away, finishing her shift, collecting her pay, and forgetting she had ever seen anything strange happen near that cake. It would have been the easy choice, the safe choice. But then she thought about what would happen 2 hours from now, when the cake was cut and served, when Damien Cross took a bite of something that had been tampered with in front of 200 witnesses who would never suspect the woman standing beside him, smiling and holding his hand, the same woman who would inherit everything the moment something went wrong. Her feet moved before her mind fully agreed to it. She set the tray down on the edge of the dessert table, wiped her damp palms against her black apron, and started walking toward the head table, her heartbeat pounding louder with every step. Oliver caught her arm just before she reached the open floor near the dais. His eyes went wide with alarm. "What are you doing?" he hissed. "You cannot go over there. Whatever you think you saw, whatever you think you need to say, you keep it to yourself. Do you understand what he is? Do you understand what his people are capable of if they think you're a threat?" "I saw her put something in the cake," Mia whispered back, her voice shaking. "Camille, I saw her pour something into it. I have to tell him." Oliver's face drained of color. "Mia, listen to me. This is not our world. We serve the food, we clear the plates, we go home. We do not accuse the future queen of an alpha king of poisoning her own fiancé's dessert in front of the entire court. If you're wrong, they will destroy you. If you're right, they might destroy you anyway just for knowing." "And if I say nothing and he's hurt because of it?" Mia asked, her voice barely above a whisper but steady now, steadier than she felt inside. "I can't live with that. I won't." She pulled her arm free before Oliver could stop her again, and continued walking, weaving between round tables draped in white linen, past guests in tailored suits and shimmering gowns who barely glanced at her, a waitress moving through the crowd like she belonged there, like she had a reason to be walking straight toward the most powerful man in the territory. Every step felt longer than the last. The music seemed to fade into background noise, replaced by the sound of her own pulse hammering in her ears. She could feel eyes beginning to turn toward her now, guests noticing the odd sight of a member of the waitstaff crossing the open floor with purpose, instead of a tray in her hands. Whispers rippled outward like ripples on water, guests leaning toward each other, murmuring questions no one had answers to yet. Near the head table, 2 guards in dark suits shifted their weight, sensing something was wrong before they even understood what it was. One of them stepped forward, a broad-shouldered man with cold eyes, positioning himself between Mia and the dais. "You need to step back," he said, his voice low and firm. "This area is restricted to staff during the reception." "Please," Mia said, forcing the words out before her courage could abandon her completely. "I need to speak to him. It's important. It's about his safety." The guard's expression didn't change, but something in his posture stiffened, like a wolf catching an unfamiliar scent. Before he could respond, a second voice cut through the air, calm but carrying an unmistakable weight of authority that made the entire section of the room go quiet. "Let her through." Mia's head snapped up. Damien Cross was looking directly at her now, his amber eyes sharp and assessing, studying her with an intensity that made her knees weak. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't moved from his seat, but the guard stepped aside instantly, as if the words had physically pushed him. The music faltered somewhere behind her, the musicians noticing the sudden shift in tension rippling through the room. Conversations died out table by table, as more and more guests turned to watch the scene unfolding near the head table. Mia felt the weight of every stare pressing down on her, her carefully practiced calm cracking under the pressure of 200 pairs of eyes. She stopped a few feet from the dais, close enough now to see the fine details of Damien's face, the faint scar along his jaw, the way his eyes seemed to see far more than she wanted them to. Camille was seated beside him, her expression frozen in a mask of polite confusion. But Mia caught the flicker of panic underneath it, there and gone in an instant. "Speak," Damien said quietly. It wasn't a request. It was a command, delivered without malice, but with absolute certainty that it would be obeyed. Mia's mouth went dry. Every rehearsed sentence she had built in her mind during the walk across the room evaporated the moment his eyes locked onto hers. She could feel Camille's gaze burning into the side of her face, a silent warning screaming louder than any words could. But she had come too far to turn back now. She took a shaking breath, glanced once at the golden cake sitting untouched near the edge of the head table, and forced the words out before fear could steal them from her a second time. "She poisoned your cake," Mia said, her voice cracking but clear enough for the front rows of tables to hear. "I saw her. I saw Camille pour something into it. Please, don't eat it." The silence that followed felt like it lasted an eternity. Somewhere near the back of the room, a glass slipped from someone's fingers and shattered against the marble floor, the sound sharp and sudden in the stunned quiet. No one moved. No one breathed. Every eye in the ballroom shifted between the trembling waitress standing in the open floor and the Alpha King seated at the head table, his expression unreadable, his amber eyes narrowing slightly as he turned to look at the woman seated beside him, the woman he had been planning to marry. Camille's composed mask cracked for just a fraction of a second, quickly replaced by wide-eyed innocence and a soft, disbelieving laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Darling," she said, reaching for Damien's arm, her voice sweet and pleading. "This is absurd. She's clearly confused, or mistaken, or perhaps someone put her up to this. You cannot possibly believe." "Quiet," Damien said, without raising his voice, without even looking at her. The single word landed like a blow, and Camille's hand froze in midair, before slowly retreating back into her lap. He rose from his chair, tall and imposing, the low murmur of the crowd falling into complete silence as he stepped down from the dais. He walked slowly toward Mia, each step deliberate, his eyes never leaving hers. Up close, he was even more intimidating than she had imagined, broad-shouldered and impossibly still, like a predator deciding whether the creature in front of him was worth the effort of a hunt. "What is your name?" he asked quietly. "Mia," she whispered. "Mia Ellison." "And you are certain of what you saw, Mia Ellison?" His voice was calm, almost gentle, but there was something underneath it, something coiled and waiting, like the stillness before a storm breaks. "Yes," she said, and this time her voice didn't shake at all. "I'm certain. I watched her do it with my own eyes, less than an hour ago, right at that table." Damien turned his head slowly toward Camille, and for the first time all evening, the warmth in his expression toward his intended bride disappeared completely, replaced by something cold and dangerously calm. "Then we will find out the truth together," he said, his voice carrying easily across the silent ballroom, loud enough for every guest, every guard, and every member of the staff to hear clearly, right now, in front of everyone. The room seemed to hold its breath as one. Camille's face had gone pale beneath her perfect makeup, her fingers gripping the edge of the table so tightly her knuckles had turned white, and Mia, standing in the middle of the open floor with 200 eyes locked onto her, understood in that moment that there was no going back now. Whatever happened next, she had already changed everything. Damien Cross turned toward the head table with the slow, deliberate calm of a man who had already decided how the next few minutes would unfold. The golden cake sat untouched near the edge of the table, its sugar flowers glinting under the chandeliers, looking far too beautiful to hide anything dangerous inside it. Yet the entire ballroom now stared at it, as if it might explode at any moment. "Bring it here," Damien said to one of his guards, his voice carrying easily across the silence. Two servers stepped forward nervously, lifting the heavy cake stand and carrying it toward the open floor where Damien stood, close enough now that Mia could smell the faint sweetness of vanilla and sugar drifting from the frosting. It looked perfectly ordinary. That was what made it so unsettling. Camille had risen from her seat, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, her knuckles pale from the pressure. She forced a smile onto her face, though it trembled faintly at the corners. "Damien, please," she said, her voice pitched low, meant only for him, though the silence in the room carried it to every table nearby. "This is embarrassing. You're going to humiliate both of us in front of everyone, over the wild claim of a waitress who probably doesn't even understand what she saw. Then it should be easy for you to prove her wrong," Damien said calmly, his eyes never leaving her face. "Take a bite." The words landed like a stone dropped into still water. A ripple of murmurs spread outward through the guests, whispers rising and falling as people leaned toward each other, unable to look away from the unfolding scene. Camille's composed expression faltered, just for an instant, before she recovered and laughed softly, the sound brittle and forced. "Of course," she said. I would be happy to prove this ridiculous accusation wrong. She reached for the small silver knife resting beside the cake stand, her fingers trembling slightly as she gripped the handle. She cut a small, careful sliver from the very edge of the bottom layer, far from where Mia had seen her pour the liquid, and lifted it toward her mouth. Not that piece, Damien said quietly. Camille froze, the fork halfway to her lips. What do you mean? I mean the top layer, Damien said, stepping closer to the cake stand, his eyes narrowing slightly as he studied her reaction. The layer she says you poured something into. Cut from there. The color drained further from Camille's face. For a long moment she said nothing at all, her eyes darting between Damien and the golden cake, searching for some way out of the corner she had backed herself into. The silence stretched unbearably, filled only by the faint crackle of candle flames and the nervous shuffling of guests too afraid to speak. I don't see why it matters which layer, Camille finally said, her voice thinner now, less certain. Cake is cake. Then it shouldn't matter to you which piece you eat, Damien replied, his tone still calm, still even, but carrying an edge now that hadn't been there a moment before. Cut from the top. Every eye in the ballroom fixed on Camille as she reached toward the top tier with shaking hands. Mia watched from a few steps away, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might be visible through her uniform. She had been so certain of what she'd seen, but now, standing in the middle of this frozen tableau, doubt crept in at the edges of her mind. What if she had been wrong? What if it really had been nothing more than a flavoring, or a decoration, and she had just destroyed her job, her reputation, and possibly her safety over a misunderstanding? Camille's knife hovered above the golden frosting, trembling visibly now. She glanced up at Damien, her eyes glistening with something that might have been tears, or might have been desperation. Darling, she whispered, please, trust me. Trust us. We're going to be married. Do you really believe I would do something like this to you? For a moment, something flickered across Damien's face, a brief crack in the otherwise unreadable mask he wore. Mia held her breath, wondering if he might relent, if the years of whatever relationship existed between them might override the doubt she had planted only minutes ago. I want to believe that, Damien said quietly, his voice softer now, almost gentle. I have wanted to believe a great many things about you, Camille. But a waitress with nothing to gain and everything to lose just walked across this entire ballroom, past armed guards, to warn me in front of 200 witnesses. She had no reason to lie. You have every reason to be afraid right now. Cut the cake. Camille's hand shook violently as she pressed the knife into the top layer. She cut a thin sliver, no larger than a coin, and lifted it slowly toward her mouth. Mia watched, her nails digging into her palms, waiting for the moment of truth that would either vindicate her or ruin her completely. At the very last second, just before the fork touched her lips, Camille's composure shattered entirely. The fork clattered from her fingers onto the marble floor, the small piece of cake tumbling with it, and she let out a broken, panicked breath. I can't, she whispered. The words seemed to hang in the air, echoing through the silent ballroom louder than any shout could have. Gasps rippled through the crowd, guests turning to each other in stunned disbelief, hands rising to cover open mouths. Mia felt her knees weaken with relief so sudden and overwhelming that she had to steady herself against the edge of a nearby table. Damien's expression hardened instantly, the last traces of gentleness disappearing from his face like frost melting under harsh sunlight. Why can't you? He asked, his voice low and dangerous now, carrying a weight that made even the guards standing nearby take an involuntary step backward. Camille's eyes filled with tears, though whether they were genuine or another performance, Mia couldn't tell. Because I'm frightened, Camille said, her voice cracking. Not because there's anything wrong with the cake, but because you're looking at me like I'm a criminal in front of everyone we know. This is supposed to be our celebration, and instead you're humiliating me because some stranger made an accusation. Then eat it, Damien said simply, and end the humiliation. Prove her wrong, and I will personally apologize to you in front of every single person in this room. The offer hung in the air, generous and simple, and yet Camille made no move to accept it. Her hands trembled at her sides, her eyes darting toward the exits, toward the guards positioned near every doorway, toward anywhere that wasn't the golden cake sitting accusingly on its silver stand. I need air, she said suddenly, turning as if to walk away from the table. No one leaves this room, Damien said, and though his voice remained level, something in it made every guard near the exits straighten immediately, blocking the doorways without needing to be told twice. Not until this is resolved. Camille turned back slowly, her carefully constructed composure crumbling further with every passing second. The guests around them had gone utterly silent now, the earlier murmurs replaced by a tense, breathless quiet as everyone waited to see what would happen next. Somewhere near the back of the room, Mia caught sight of Oliver standing frozen beside an overturned serving tray, his face pale with a mixture of fear and disbelief at what he was witnessing. "Bring the palace healer," Damien said to one of the guards standing nearby, never taking his eyes off Camille. "I want the cake tested properly. Every layer, every ingredient, and I want it done now." The guard nodded and disappeared quickly through a side door, leaving the ballroom in a state of suspended tension. Camille's eyes followed him until he vanished from sight, and something in her expression shifted, the fear giving way briefly to something colder, more calculating, as if she were rapidly working through the remaining options available to her. "This is unnecessary," she said, straightening her shoulders and attempting to reclaim some measure of dignity. "You're going to look foolish when the healer confirms there's nothing wrong with that cake, and by then you'll have already destroyed our engagement in front of everyone who matters to our future." "If the healer confirms there's nothing wrong," Damien said quietly, "then I will do exactly as I promised. I will apologize to you, publicly and sincerely, and we will continue this celebration as though none of this happened. But if he finds something, Camille, I want you to understand very clearly what will happen next." He stepped closer to her, his voice dropping low enough that only those standing nearest could hear it clearly, though the silence of the room carried his words further than perhaps he intended. "There will be no mercy," he said. "Not for you, and not for whoever helped you plan this." Camille's face went white, all traces of her earlier composure finally abandoning her completely. Her eyes darted once more toward the doorways, toward the guards standing rigid and unmoving, and then finally toward Mia, standing quietly near the edge of the crowd, watching everything unfold with wide, uncertain eyes. For a brief moment, their gazes met, and Mia saw something in Camille's expression that chilled her more than anything that had happened so far. It wasn't fear anymore. It was hatred, cold and sharp and utterly focused, aimed directly at the young waitress who had dared to speak up in a room full of powerful people who preferred silence. The side door opened again, and the guard returned, followed closely by an older man in a long gray coat carrying a small leather case. The palace healer moved with quiet efficiency, setting his case down on a nearby table and opening it to reveal an array of small vials, glass droppers, and delicate instruments Mia had never seen before. "Test it," Damien said simply. The healer nodded, approaching the golden cake with careful, practiced movements. He extracted a small sample from the top layer, exactly where Camille had cut her sliver only minutes before, and placed it into a shallow glass dish. He added a few drops of clear liquid from one of his vials, then held the dish up toward the candlelight, watching closely as the mixture began to change color. The entire ballroom seemed to lean forward as one, waiting, watching, holding its collective breath. Mia's heart pounded so loudly in her own ears that she barely heard the healer's soft, sharp intake of breath as the liquid in the dish shifted from clear to a deep, unmistakable shade of violet. "There's something here," the healer said quietly, though his voice carried through the silent room as clearly as a shout. "Something that shouldn't be. A compound I recognize, though I have not seen it used in many years." Damien's expression turned to stone. He looked at Camille, and this time, there was no warmth left in his eyes at all, only a cold, quiet fury that seemed to radiate outward from him like heat from a flame. "What compound?" he asked, his voice dangerously calm. The healer hesitated, glancing between Damien and the trembling woman standing beside the cake, before finally answering in a low, careful voice that somehow made the words even more terrifying. "A derivative of wolfsbane," he said, "refined and very rare. Not enough to kill a man of your strength, my lord, but more than enough to strip an alpha of everything that makes him one." Gasps rippled through the crowd like a wave, guests turning to each other in horrified whispers, hands pressed against open mouths. Mia felt the blood drain from her own face as the true weight of what she had prevented settled over her like a physical thing. This hadn't been about killing Damien Cross at all. It had been about something far more calculated, far more cruel. Camille's carefully constructed mask finally shattered completely, her shoulders slumping as the last of her composure gave way, replaced by something desperate and cornered. "Damien," she whispered, "please, let me explain." But Damien had already turned away from her, his eyes finding Mia across the silent ballroom, his expression unreadable, though something in the way he looked at her made Mia's breath catch in her throat. Whatever happened next, she understood with absolute certainty that the events of this night were far from finished. The healer's words seemed to hang in the air long after he had spoken them, echoing through the stunned silence of the ballroom like a bell that refused to stop ringing. A derivative of wolfsbane, refined enough to strip an alpha of his power without ending his life. Mia stood frozen near the edge of the crowd, watching the color drain from face after face as guests began to understand the true horror of what had almost happened. Camille had gone completely still, her hands trembling at her sides, her eyes fixed on the floor as though she could no longer bear to look at anyone in the room. The confident, composed woman who had glided through the gala only an hour earlier had vanished entirely, replaced by someone small and frightened, cornered by her own carefully laid plan. Damien stepped closer to her, his presence somehow filling the entire space between them despite the distance still separating their bodies. "Explain," he said quietly. "Now, in front of everyone, since you were so eager to marry me in front of everyone." Camille lifted her head slowly, tears streaking down her carefully applied makeup, though Mia found herself unable to determine whether they were genuine or simply another tool in a long night of performances. "You don't understand what it's like," Camille said, her voice trembling. "Being expected to marry into power, knowing that the moment the ceremony ends, you become nothing more than an ornament beside a throne. I wanted something more. So you decided to take my strength instead of earning your own," Damien said, his voice hardening with every word. "You decided that stripping me of everything my bloodline fought for was an acceptable price for whatever ambition drove you." "It wasn't my idea," Camille blurted suddenly, panic breaking through her earlier composure. "I was approached months ago. There are people who wanted this, who needed the cross territory weakened from within, and they promised me a position of real power once it was done, not just a decorative title beside a man who barely noticed me outside of public events." The room erupted into hushed, urgent whispers, guests leaning toward each other, some looking genuinely horrified, others watching with the kind of fascinated dread reserved for accidents no one could look away from. Damien raised a single hand, and the whispers died instantly, the entire ballroom falling silent once more under the weight of his authority. "Who approached you?" he asked. Camille hesitated, glancing toward the exits again, as if some part of her still believed escape was possible. The guards standing at every doorway remained motionless, their eyes fixed on her, and slowly, the last flicker of hope seemed to drain from her expression. "The Ashgrove pack," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper, though it carried through the silent room with terrible clarity. "Their alpha has wanted your territory weakened for years. He knew he could never challenge you directly while you held your full strength, so he found another way. He found me." Damien's jaw tightened, a muscle flexing beneath the sharp line of his cheek. The Ashgrove pack was a name Mia had never heard before that night, but judging by the reaction rippling through the crowd, murmurs of shock and anger spreading from table to table, it was clearly a name that meant something significant to everyone else in the room. "How long?" Damien asked quietly. "Have you been planning this?" "Since before we were formally introduced," Camille admitted, her voice cracking. "The courtship, the engagement, all of it was arranged from the beginning. I was meant to gain your trust, become close enough to have access to moments exactly like this one, and then remove your strength at the precise moment it would cause the most damage, during our wedding celebration, in front of every ally and rival territory who would witness your humiliation firsthand." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd as the full scope of the plan became clear. This hadn't been a moment of desperation or a single reckless decision. It had been a calculated scheme, built over months, designed to strike at the worst possible moment, in front of the largest possible audience, ensuring that Damien's weakness would become public knowledge instantly, spreading through every territory, before he could even attempt to hide it or recover from it. Mia felt sick as she listened, understanding now just how close disaster had truly come. If she hadn't seen Camille slip that vial into the frosting, if she hadn't found the courage to cross the ballroom despite every warning screaming at her to stay silent, this celebration would have ended with Damien Cross powerless in front of every rival who might have wished him harm, in front of every ally who might have questioned whether his territory was still worth protecting. "Who else knows?" Damien asked, his voice deceptively calm, though Mia could see the tension coiled in his shoulders, the barely restrained fury simmering beneath his controlled exterior. "No one here," Camille said quickly. "I swear it. I was meant to act alone tonight. The Ashgrove Alpha didn't want too many people involved, didn't want the risk of the plan leaking before it could be carried out." Damien studied her for a long moment, his amber eyes searching her face for any hint of further deception. Whatever he found there seemed to satisfy him, at least for the moment, though the coldness in his expression never wavered. "Take her," he said finally, turning to the guard standing nearby. "Hold her separately. I want her questioned properly, away from this crowd, and I want confirmation of everything she has just told us." Two guards stepped forward immediately, taking hold of Camille's arms with firm, practiced movements. She didn't resist, her earlier fight seeming to have drained out of her entirely. replaced by a hollow, resigned silence, as she allowed herself to be led toward a side door near the edge of the ballroom. Just before she disappeared through the doorway, she turned back one final time, her eyes finding Mia across the crowded room. For a moment, something passed between them, an unspoken message that made Mia's skin crawl despite the distance separating them. "You should have stayed invisible," Camille said quietly, her voice carrying just far enough for Mia to hear clearly. "People like you always regret stepping into rooms like this." Then she was gone, disappearing through the side door with the guards flanking her on either side, leaving behind a ballroom full of stunned guests and a silence so thick it felt almost physical. Damien remained standing near the abandoned cake stand for a long moment, his expression unreadable, his shoulders tense with whatever emotions he was carefully containing beneath his composed exterior. Slowly, he turned to face the crowd, his eyes sweeping across the sea of faces watching him with a mixture of fear, fascination, and undisguised curiosity. "The celebration is over for tonight," he announced, his voice carrying easily across the silent room. "I apologize for the disruption, but I trust everyone here understands the necessity of what just occurred. Please return to your homes safely. My people will ensure you are escorted out without incident." The guests began to move slowly, murmuring quietly among themselves as they gathered their belongings and made their way toward the exits, casting curious glances back toward the abandoned dessert table and the young waitress still standing near its edge, unsure of what she was supposed to do now that the crisis had passed. Mia watched the crowd disperse, her mind still reeling from everything that had just happened. She had come to this gala expecting nothing more than a long night of carrying trays and refilling glasses, and instead, she had uncovered a conspiracy that could have reshaped the balance of power across multiple territories. The weight of it settled over her slowly, her legs suddenly feeling unsteady beneath her. She turned to leave, intending to slip quietly back toward the service entrance and disappear into the night before anyone remembered to question why she had been the one to notice what no one else had seen. But before she could take more than a few steps, a low, steady voice stopped her completely. "Wait." Mia turned back slowly to find Damien watching her, his expression softer now than it had been throughout the entire confrontation, though still carrying the weight of everything that had just transpired. The remaining guests continued filing out around them, but he seemed entirely focused on her, as though the rest of the emptying ballroom had faded into irrelevant background noise. "Yes," Mia said quietly, unsure of what else to say, unsure of what he could possibly want from her now that the danger had passed and the truth had been revealed. "Come with me," Damien said. "There is much I need to understand about tonight, and much I believe I owe you." Mia's heart pounded as she considered the request, uncertain whether following him deeper into a world she barely understood was wise or reckless. But something in his eyes, some quiet sincerity beneath the exhaustion and anger still visible in his expression, made her nod slowly despite the uncertainty twisting in her stomach. "All right," she said softly, and followed him away from the abandoned cake and the empty ballroom, toward whatever came next. The private study Damien led her to was nothing like the grand ballroom they had left behind. Instead of marble floors and glittering chandeliers, this room felt quiet and grounded, lined with tall bookshelves and warmed by a low fire crackling in a stone hearth. Mia stood near the doorway, unsure whether to sit or remain standing, her hands still trembling slightly from the adrenaline of the past hour. "Sit," Damien said, gesturing toward a chair near the fire as he settled into the one across from it. "You look like you're about to collapse." Mia sank into the chair gratefully, her legs finally giving out from beneath the careful composure she had forced herself to maintain throughout the confrontation in the ballroom. Now that the immediate danger had passed, the full weight of everything that had happened crashed over her at once, leaving her hands shaking in her lap. Damien watched her for a long moment, his expression difficult to read in the flickering firelight. "You saved my life tonight," he said finally, "or something close to it. Do you understand what would have happened if that compound had entered my system?" "The healer said it wouldn't kill you," Mia said quietly. "No," Damien agreed, "it wouldn't have. But for an alpha, losing one's strength is a fate many would consider worse than death. My territory exists because my ability to protect it is absolute. The moment that ability disappeared, every rival pack watching tonight's celebration would have understood instantly that cross-territory was vulnerable. Ashgrove wouldn't have needed to lift a single hand against me directly. Others would have done the work for them, tearing apart everything my family built over generations, simply because I could no longer stop them." Mia absorbed his words slowly, understanding now the true scope of what she had prevented. It wasn't simply about saving one man's life. It had been about protecting an entire territory, countless lives that depended on the strength and stability Damien represented, all of it hanging by the thin thread of whether a nervous waitress found the courage to speak up. Why did you believe me? Mia asked suddenly, the question surfacing before she could stop it. You didn't know me. I could have been lying, or mistaken, or working with someone who wanted to disrupt your engagement for entirely different reasons. Yet you let me approach you, and then you took my word over hers. Damien considered the question carefully before answering, his amber eyes reflecting the firelight in a way that made them look almost molten. Because you had nothing to gain, he said finally. Camille stood to gain everything from my downfall. You risked everything, your job, your safety, possibly your life, to warn a stranger you had no obligation to protect. People rarely display that kind of courage unless they believe completely in what they're saying. Mia felt heat rise in her cheeks at his words, unused to being looked at with anything resembling admiration, especially not from someone as powerful and intimidating as the man sitting across from her. I almost didn't say anything, she admitted quietly. I told myself it wasn't my place, that speaking up could destroy everything I've worked for. I was terrified. And yet you did it anyway, Damien said. That matters more than the fear itself. Courage isn't the absence of fear, Mia Ellison. It's acting despite it. The sound of her full name in his voice sent an unexpected shiver down her spine, though she couldn't quite identify why. She glanced away from his gaze, suddenly aware of how close they were sitting, how the firelight cast soft shadows across his sharp features, making him look less like the terrifying alpha king the staff had warned her about, and more like simply a man, exhausted and grateful, and trying to make sense of a night that had upended everything he thought he understood about the woman he had planned to marry. A soft knock interrupted the quiet moment, and one of Damien's advisors entered, an older man with graying hair and sharp, calculating eyes that studied Mia briefly before turning to his alpha. My lord, the advisor said, Camille has been secured in the eastern wing under guard. She has requested to speak with you again, though I would advise against it until we've completed a more thorough investigation into her claims about the Ashgrove pack. Damien nodded slowly, his expression hardening once more at the mention of the conspiracy that had nearly succeeded tonight. Have you begun reaching out to our allies? Discreetly, yes, the advisor confirmed, though word travels quickly in circles like ours. I suspect by morning, every territory within 3 days' ride will know what almost happened here tonight. Then let them know, Damien said, his voice hardening with quiet resolve. Let them know that cross-territory remains standing, and that anyone who conspires against it will find themselves dealt with swiftly and without mercy. The advisor nodded and turned to leave, though his eyes lingered briefly on Mia before he exited the room, clearly curious about the young waitress sitting so casually near the fire with his alpha, engaged in a conversation that seemed far more personal than the circumstances might have suggested. Once the door closed again, Damien turned his attention back to Mia, his expression softening slightly. I owe you a debt I'm not entirely certain how to repay, he said. Name what you want. Money, protection, a position within my territory if you desire it. Whatever you require, you shall have it. Mia hesitated, genuinely uncertain how to respond to an offer so significant it felt almost overwhelming. She had come to this gala hoping only to earn enough for rent, and now the most powerful man in 3 territories was offering her essentially anything she wanted in return for what she had considered, in the moment, simply the right thing to do. I don't need anything, she said finally. I did what I did because it felt wrong to stay silent, not because I expected a reward. Damien studied her for a long moment, something unreadable flickering behind his amber eyes. That, he said slowly, is precisely why you deserve one. Those who act selflessly rarely believe they deserve recognition for it, yet they are often the very people most deserving of it. Before Mia could respond, a strange sensation prickled at the edges of her awareness, subtle but undeniable, like static gathering before a storm. She noticed Damien's posture shift slightly, his nostrils flaring almost imperceptibly as he leaned forward, his gaze sharpening with sudden, focused intensity. What is it? Mia asked, unsettled by the sudden change in his demeanor. Damien didn't answer immediately, his eyes searching her face as though he were seeing her clearly for the first time, noticing something he hadn't registered during the chaos of the ballroom. Slowly, almost hesitantly, he rose from his chair and took a single step closer, his expression a mixture of confusion and something else, something Mia couldn't quite identify. Forgive me, he said quietly, though he made no move to step back. There's something about you I hadn't noticed until now. What do you mean? Mia asked, her heart beginning to pound for reasons entirely separate from the danger of the evening. Damien shook his head slowly, seeming to catch himself, pulling back from whatever thought had briefly consumed him. It's nothing, he said, though his voice carried an uncertainty that suggested otherwise. Tonight has been long, and my instincts are perhaps overwhelmed by everything that has happened. Forgive my strange behavior." Mia nodded slowly, though the moment left her with a lingering unease she couldn't quite shake, a sense that something significant had passed between them that neither of them fully understood yet. She glanced toward the window, noticing the first hints of gray light beginning to creep across the horizon, signaling that dawn wasn't far away. "I should return home," she said quietly. "My shift ended hours ago, and I imagine you have a great deal to address before the sun rises fully." Damien nodded, though something in his expression suggested reluctance at the idea of her leaving. "I will have someone escort you safely," he said. "And Mia, I meant what I said earlier. Whatever you need, whenever you need it, you have only to ask." Mia thanked him quietly and rose from her chair, her legs still slightly unsteady beneath her as the exhaustion of the night finally began to catch up with her fully. As she made her way toward the door, she couldn't shake the strange feeling that this night, despite everything terrifying that had happened within it, had changed something far larger than simply preventing a conspiracy from succeeding. Something had shifted, quietly and irrevocably, though she couldn't yet understand exactly what it was. Mia didn't sleep that night, even after a quiet car had driven her back to her small apartment above a laundromat on the edge of town, even after she had locked her door and changed out of her uniform, and collapsed onto her bed exhausted beyond measure. Sleep refused to come. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Camille's cold stare, heard the healer's grim voice announcing the presence of poison, felt the weight of 200 eyes locked onto her as she crossed that endless ballroom floor. By the time morning light filtered through her thin curtains, Mia had given up entirely on the idea of rest. She made herself a cup of coffee and sat by her small kitchen window, staring out at the quiet street below, wondering if the events of the previous night had truly happened, or if exhaustion and stress had conjured some elaborate dream. The knock on her door around mid-morning confirmed it had all been real. She opened it cautiously to find a woman standing there, dressed simply but elegantly, her expression calm and professional. "Mia Ellison?" the woman asked. "Yes," Mia said, gripping the edge of the door. "My name is Grace. I work for Alpha Cross. He asked me to check on you this morning, and to let you know that the investigation into last night's events is proceeding. He also wanted me to relay that your presence is requested at the estate, whenever you feel ready." Mia blinked, surprised by the request. "Is something wrong?" "Nothing more than what already happened," Grace assured her gently. "But there have been developments regarding the Ashgrove pack, and Alpha Cross believed you deserved to know, given your role in uncovering the conspiracy." Mia agreed to go, mostly out of curiosity and a lingering sense that she was now tangled in something far larger than she had ever anticipated. Grace drove her to the same grand estate she had left only hours earlier, though in daylight, the sprawling grounds looked less intimidating and more simply beautiful, surrounded by tall trees and manicured gardens that stretched toward the horizon. Damien met her in the same private study from the night before, though he looked different in the morning light, less shadowed and imposing, more simply tired, the weight of sleepless hours evident in the faint lines around his eyes. "Thank you for coming," he said, gesturing for her to sit. "Grace mentioned developments," Mia said, settling into the same chair she had occupied hours earlier. "About Ashgrove." Damien nodded, his expression darkening slightly. "We reached out to several allied territories at dawn, informing them of what occurred. As expected, word has already begun spreading rapidly. The Ashgrove Alpha, a man named Nathan Ashgrove, has denied any involvement, claiming Camille acted entirely on her own initiative, without his knowledge or blessing." "Do you believe him?" Mia asked. "No," Damien said flatly. "But proving his involvement without a full confession from Camille herself will be difficult. She has grown quiet since being questioned further this morning, refusing to elaborate beyond what she already confessed last night in front of the entire ballroom." Mia frowned, considering the implications. "What happens to her now?" "That depends largely on what further information we can extract," Damien said. "Conspiracy against an alpha carries severe consequences within our laws, particularly one that involved deliberate deception on this scale. But without concrete evidence tying Ashgrove directly to the plan, we may only be able to hold her accountable, while he continues to operate freely, likely already planning his next attempt." The weight of his words settled heavily over the room. Mia hadn't considered, in the chaos of the previous night, that uncovering one conspiracy might simply reveal a larger, more complicated threat lurking beneath the surface, one that might not be resolved so easily or so quickly. "There's something else," Damien said after a moment of silence, his voice quieter now, more hesitant than she had heard from him before. "Something I need to discuss with you, though I confess I'm uncertain how to explain it properly." Mia's heart quickened slightly at the shift in his tone. "What is it?" Damien rose from his chair and moved toward the window, his back to her as he gathered his thoughts. Among my people, he began slowly, there exists a concept many outsiders find difficult to understand. A bond, sometimes called a fated connection, that occurs rarely between two individuals. It cannot be chosen or arranged. It simply happens, recognized instinctively through scent and presence. A pull that even the strongest among us cannot ignore once it manifests. Mia listened carefully, though confusion knotted in her chest at where this explanation was heading. I don't understand what that has to do with me, she said slowly. Damien turned back to face her, his amber eyes carrying an intensity that made her breath catch in her throat. Last night, in this very room, I noticed something about you I had never experienced before, not with Camille, not with anyone I have ever met throughout my entire life. A pull, subtle but unmistakable, that I initially dismissed as exhaustion or the lingering adrenaline of the evening's events. Mia's pulse quickened, though she remained silent, waiting for him to continue, uncertain where this revelation might lead. I believe, Damien said slowly, carefully, that you may be my fated mate. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implications Mia barely understood. She stared at him, searching his expression for any sign that this was some elaborate joke or misunderstanding, but found only quiet sincerity reflected back at her. That's impossible, she said finally, though her voice lacked conviction even to her own ears. I'm human. I don't know anything about your world, your customs, any of this. Yesterday I was simply a waitress trying to pay rent, and today you're telling me I'm somehow connected to you in a way that defies explanation. I understand this is overwhelming, Damien said gently, taking a small step closer, though he stopped short of closing the distance between them entirely. I do not expect you to accept this easily, nor do I wish to pressure you into anything you're not prepared for. But I felt it would be dishonest to withhold this information from you, particularly given everything else that has already changed between us in such a short time. Mia sat in stunned silence, her mind racing through everything that had happened over the past 12 hours. She had walked into that gala expecting nothing more than a difficult shift among wealthy strangers, and instead she had uncovered a conspiracy, confronted the most powerful man in 3 territories, and was now being told that some mystical bond connected her to him, in ways she couldn't begin to comprehend. What does it mean? She asked slowly. If it's true, this bond you're describing? It means, Damien said carefully, that among my people, few things are considered more significant than a fated connection. It transcends politics, alliances, arranged engagements, all of it. If the bond is genuine, it would mean that whatever connection exists between us carries a weight far beyond simple attraction or circumstance. Mia absorbed his words slowly, trying to reconcile the impossible scope of everything unfolding around her. Only yesterday, her greatest concern had been affording her rent payment. Now she was being told she might share an unbreakable connection with an alpha king, in a world she barely understood, filled with dangers and politics far beyond anything she had ever encountered in her ordinary life. I need time, she said finally, her voice quiet but steady. This is too much to process all at once. Of course, Damien said immediately, respect evident in his tone. Take whatever time you require. I will not pressure you toward anything you're not ready for, regardless of what instinct tells me about the connection between us. Mia nodded gratefully, though her mind remained a whirlwind of confusion and uncertainty, as she considered everything that had transpired since she had walked into that ballroom the previous evening. She rose from her chair, intending to return home and process the overwhelming revelations of the morning in solitude. But before she could take more than a few steps toward the door, a sharp knock interrupted the quiet study, followed immediately by Grace entering with an expression of urgent concern etched across her usually composed features. My lord, Grace said quickly, there's been an incident at the eastern wing. Camille is gone. Damien's entire demeanor shifted the instant Grace spoke, the quiet vulnerability he had shown only moments earlier vanishing completely, replaced by sharp, focused alertness that radiated authority through every line of his posture. Explain, he said, his voice clipped and urgent. The guards assigned to watch her reported checking on her less than an hour ago, Grace said quickly. She was secured in the eastern chamber, the door locked and monitored continuously. When the next rotation arrived to bring her morning meal, the room was empty. There's no sign of forced entry, no broken locks, nothing to indicate how she managed to leave undetected. Someone helped her, Damien said flatly, already moving toward the door, his long strides carrying him quickly through the study. Mia hurried to keep pace, uncertain whether she was meant to follow, but unwilling to be left behind given everything that had already unfolded around her in the past day. We're reviewing every guard who had access to that wing, Grace continued. following alongside them as they moved swiftly through the estate's corridors. But if someone on the inside assisted her escape, it suggests Ashgrove's reach extends further into our territory than we previously believed. Damien's jaw tightened at the implication, his expression darkening further with every passing second. "Gather the search teams immediately," he ordered. "I want every road leading away from this territory monitored. She cannot have gotten far, not without transportation arranged in advance." Grace nodded and peeled away toward a different corridor, already speaking urgently into a small communication device clipped to her collar as she moved. Damien continued toward the eastern wing, and Mia followed close behind, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and unwelcome curiosity about what they might discover. The chamber where Camille had been held was simple but secure, a single narrow window too small for anyone to fit through, a heavy door with multiple locking mechanisms, and thick stone walls that would have made any conventional escape nearly impossible. Yet the room stood entirely empty, the bed still made, no signs of struggle or forced departure anywhere within its confines. Damien moved through the space slowly, his eyes narrowed as he studied every detail, searching for anything that might explain how Camille had managed to vanish without a trace. Mia stood near the doorway, watching him work, noticing the controlled tension radiating from every movement he made. "There," Damien said suddenly, crouching near the base of the wall opposite the door. He ran his fingers along a nearly invisible seam in the stone, and after a moment of careful examination, a section of the wall shifted slightly beneath his touch, revealing a narrow passage hidden behind it. "A hidden tunnel," Mia said, staring at the dark opening in disbelief. "This estate is centuries old," Damien said grimly, rising from his crouch. "Built during times of far greater conflict than we experience today. It seems whoever assisted Camille possessed knowledge of these old passages that even I had forgotten existed." "Where does it lead?" Mia asked. "Beyond the eastern boundary of the property," Damien said, his expression hardening further, "directly toward the road leading out of cross territory entirely." He turned sharply, already moving back toward the corridor, his focus absolute now, every trace of the earlier vulnerability she had witnessed replaced entirely by the cold, calculating presence of a leader, facing a genuine threat to everything he had built. "I need to organize the search personally," he said. "Mia, I would ask that you remain here at the estate where you'll be safe until this matter is resolved." Mia hesitated, torn between the instinct to simply agree and retreat to safety, and a stubborn refusal to be sidelined after everything she had already risked to bring this conspiracy into the light. "I want to help," she said finally. Damien turned back to look at her, surprise flickering briefly across his sharp features. "This isn't your fight, Mia. You've already done more than anyone could have asked of you. There's no need to place yourself in further danger." "She looked at me like she hated me," Mia said quietly, remembering the cold, sharp glance Camille had given her before being led away the previous night. "I don't think this is over. Not for her, and not for whoever helped her escape. If there's anything I can do to help find her before she causes more harm, I want to try." Damien studied her for a long moment, something complicated passing behind his amber eyes, admiration mixed with clear reluctance at the idea of allowing her anywhere near further danger. Finally, he nodded slowly. "Stay close to me then," he said, "and do exactly as I say, without hesitation, should the situation grow dangerous." Mia agreed, and together they moved quickly through the estate, gathering members of Damien's search teams along the way, sharp-eyed men and women, who moved with the same controlled efficiency Mia had witnessed among the guards the previous night. Within minutes, several vehicles were prepared, and the search parties began fanning out across the surrounding territory, following the direction the hidden tunnel had indicated. Damien drove one of the vehicles himself, Mia seated beside him, tension coiling tightly in the small space between them, as they sped along winding roads bordered by dense forest on either side. Neither spoke for several minutes, both focused entirely on the search, scanning the tree line for any sign of movement, any indication that Camille might have taken shelter somewhere along this route. "There," Mia said suddenly, pointing toward a narrow break in the trees where fresh tire tracks were visible in the soft earth, leading away from the main road toward a smaller, less traveled path. Damien followed her direction immediately, guiding the vehicle carefully onto the narrow trail, branches scraping against the sides of the car as they pushed deeper into the forest. After several tense minutes, the trees opened into a small clearing where an abandoned vehicle sat parked haphazardly, its driver's door left hanging open. Damien brought their car to a stop and stepped out cautiously, his senses clearly heightened, scanning the surrounding forest for any sign of danger. Mia followed close behind, her heart pounding as she took in the scene before them. "She switched vehicles," Damien said quietly. examining the abandoned car. Someone was waiting here to help her continue on foot or by a different route. A sudden rustle in the nearby brush caught both their attention simultaneously. Damien's entire body tensed, positioning himself protectively between Mia and the source of the sound, his eyes narrowing as he studied the tree line intently. "Show yourself," he called out, his voice carrying an authority that seemed to vibrate through the quiet clearing. "There is nowhere left to run." For a long moment, silence stretched across the clearing, broken only by the soft rustling of leaves in the gentle breeze. Then, slowly, a figure emerged from behind a thick cluster of trees, hands raised slightly, though the expression on the face that finally came into view carried none of the fear or resignation Mia might have expected. It wasn't Camille who stepped into the clearing. It was a man Mia had never seen before, tall and broad-shouldered, his dark eyes calculating as he studied Damien with open, unmasked contempt. "Alpha Cross," the stranger said, his voice carrying a mocking edge. "I was wondering how long it would take you to find this place." Damien's expression turned to granite. "Nathan Ashgrove," he said quietly, recognition and fury coloring every syllable of the name. "I should have known you would be foolish enough to come here yourself." Nathan Ashgrove stood at the edge of the clearing with the relaxed confidence of a man who believed he still held every advantage, despite standing alone against the Alpha whose territory he had spent months conspiring to weaken. His dark eyes flicked briefly toward Mia before returning to Damien, a faint, unsettling smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "I see the little waitress is still following you around," Nathan said, his tone dripping with contempt. "How touching. The great Alpha Cross, protected from ruin by a human girl carrying dessert trays." "Where is Camille?" Damien asked, his voice deceptively calm, though Mia could feel the tension radiating from him, coiled and ready like a predator waiting for the precise moment to strike. "Safe, for now," Nathan said, spreading his hands slightly, as though offering a gesture of peace that neither of them believed for a moment. "Though I imagine her usefulness to me has come to an end, given how spectacularly she failed to accomplish what we planned." "You admit it then," Damien said. "Your involvement in the conspiracy." Nathan laughed softly, the sound cold and humorless. "Why deny it now? You already know the truth, Cross. Camille confessed everything in front of your entire ballroom last night, thanks to your little human's interference. There's little point pretending innocence at this stage." Mia watched the exchange with her heart hammering against her ribs, acutely aware of how exposed they were, standing in an isolated clearing with a man who had orchestrated a plot to strip Damien of his power entirely. She glanced toward the tree line, wondering if Nathan had come alone or if others were hidden nearby, waiting for a signal to act. "You should have simply accepted my territory's dominance," Damien said, his voice hardening further. "Instead you chose deception, conspiracy, and cowardice, hiding behind a woman you manipulated into betraying the man she was meant to marry." "Cowardice?" Nathan repeated, his composed mask flickering for the first time, genuine anger bleeding through his carefully maintained calm. "I call it strategy. You inherited your territory through bloodline, Cross, through nothing more than the accident of birth. I have spent years building alliances, gathering resources, positioning myself to challenge dominance that was never earned through merit in the first place." "And yet your strategy failed," Damien said flatly, "because you underestimated the courage of someone you dismissed as insignificant." Nathan's eyes flicked toward Mia again, sharper this time, calculating in a way that made her skin crawl. "A mistake I intend to correct," he said quietly. The words hung in the air with unmistakable menace, and Mia felt Damien shift immediately, positioning his body more fully between her and the man standing across the clearing. "You will not touch her," Damien said, his voice dropping into something low and dangerous, carrying a weight that made even the surrounding forest seem to fall silent in response. "Won't I?" Nathan asked, tilting his head slightly. "Tell me, Cross, how does it feel, knowing that everything you value, your territory, your strength, and apparently now your fated mate, all of it hangs by such a fragile thread? One waitress, in the right place at the right time, and your entire world nearly collapsed around you. Imagine how easily it could still happen, if the right pressure were applied in the right places." Damien's entire posture shifted, something primal and dangerous rippling beneath his controlled exterior, and for a moment, Mia understood with sudden, visceral clarity exactly why the staff had warned her so urgently the previous night to never draw the attention of an Alpha King. The air around him seemed to grow heavier, charged with barely restrained power that made her instincts scream at her to step back, though she found herself frozen in place, unable to look away. "You came here alone," Damien said quietly, "to threaten the one person who exposed your conspiracy, believing you could simply walk away afterward without consequence." I came here, Nathan corrected, to offer you a choice. Step aside quietly. Relinquish claim over the northern trade routes your territory has controlled for generations, and I will ensure Camille disappears entirely, taking every secret about this conspiracy with her. Refuse, and I promise you, this will not be the last attempt on your strength, nor will it be the last time someone close to you becomes a target. You're threatening me in my own territory, Damien said, his voice deceptively soft now, surrounded by my people, having already failed once to accomplish your goals. Do you truly believe I would consider your offer for even a moment? Nathan's expression darkened, his earlier confidence beginning to waver slightly as he seemed to recalculate the situation unfolding around him. You should consider it carefully, he said, because I assure you, Cross, I did not come here entirely without protection of my own. The rustling in the surrounding trees intensified suddenly, and Mia's stomach dropped as several more figures emerged from the forest, surrounding the clearing on nearly every side. Damien's search team, having followed at a slight distance, moved quickly into position as well. Though the numbers seemed roughly matched, the tension in the clearing sharpening into something that felt dangerously close to violence. This ends now, Damien said, his voice carrying clearly across the standoff, one way or another. Nathan's smile returned, cold and calculating. I agree completely, he said, though perhaps not in the manner you're expecting. He raised a hand slightly, and for a terrifying moment, Mia believed he was signaling an attack. Instead, from behind the same cluster of trees where Nathan had emerged, another figure stepped forward, hands bound, a guard positioned closely behind her. It was Camille. Her expression was drawn and exhausted, dark circles visible beneath her eyes, though something in her posture had shifted since Mia had last seen her led away from the ballroom. She looked directly at Damien, and then, unexpectedly, at Mia, something unreadable passing across her tired features. He's using me as leverage, Camille said suddenly, her voice hoarse but clear enough to carry across the clearing. Don't listen to anything he offers, Damien. He intends to betray you regardless of what you agree to. Nathan's expression flickered with irritation, his grip tightening on Camille's shoulder as he pulled her roughly backward. Quiet, he snapped. But the words had already landed, and Mia watched Damien's expression shift from controlled fury into something sharper, more focused, as though Camille's warning had confirmed something he had already suspected. Release her, Damien said quietly, and perhaps I'll consider showing you the smallest measure of mercy. Nathan's laugh this time carried a slight edge of desperation beneath its earlier confidence. You're not in a position to negotiate terms, Cross. Actually, Damien said, his voice suddenly calm, almost pleasant. I believe I am. He gave a small, subtle signal with his hand, and Mia realized suddenly that the members of Damien's search team surrounding the clearing had already begun moving into tighter formation, cutting off every possible route of escape long before Nathan had noticed the shift happening around him. Nathan's confident expression finally cracked completely as he glanced around the clearing, understanding dawning slowly across his features that he had walked directly into a situation he could no longer control. This isn't over, he said, though his voice had lost much of its earlier menace. No, Damien agreed quietly. It isn't, but it's certainly about to change significantly in my favor. The standoff in the clearing seemed to stretch endlessly, though in reality, only seconds passed before Nathan's confidence collapsed entirely under the weight of his miscalculation. Damien's search team had encircled the clearing so completely that every path leading back into the forest was blocked, leaving Nathan and his small group of supporters with nowhere left to retreat. Lower your weapons, Damien said calmly, his voice carrying easily across the tense silence, and this can end without further bloodshed. Nathan's eyes darted rapidly around the clearing, calculating his remaining options, though it was clear from his tightening posture that he understood how thoroughly the situation had turned against him. His grip on Camille's arm loosened slightly as his focus shifted entirely toward assessing the threat surrounding him. You wouldn't dare harm me, Nathan said, though the confidence in his voice had thinned considerably. An attack against another territory's alpha would spark conflict far beyond anything either of us could control. I have no intention of harming you, Damien said calmly. I intend to hold you accountable, in front of witnesses, for conspiring against my territory and endangering the life of an innocent woman who had nothing to do with the ambitions driving your actions. Nathan's eyes flicked toward Mia briefly, something calculating passing behind his gaze, though whatever plan he might have been considering evaporated the moment two of Damien's guards moved swiftly to secure Camille, pulling her gently away from Nathan's loosened grip and guiding her toward safety at the edge of the clearing. Freed from her captor, Camille stumbled slightly, exhaustion evident in every line of her posture, though her eyes remained sharp, focused entirely on Nathan, with an expression that had shifted from fear into something resembling cold, simmering anger. "You told me this would work," Camille said suddenly, her voice trembling with barely controlled fury. "You promised me power, a position of real influence, and instead, I nearly lost everything, because your plan depended on nothing going wrong." "Quiet," Nathan snapped, though his authority over her seemed to have evaporated entirely now that his own position had crumbled so completely. "No," Camille said, straightening despite her exhaustion, turning to face Damien directly. "I want to speak. I have information that will matter far more than anything I said last night." Damien studied her carefully, his expression unreadable, though Mia noticed a flicker of genuine curiosity beneath his controlled exterior. "Speak then," he said. "Nathan didn't act alone," Camille said, her voice growing steadier with every word. "He has allies within your own territory, Damien. People close to you who have been feeding him information for months. That's how he knew about the hidden tunnel beneath the eastern wing. That's how he arranged for a vehicle to be waiting when I escaped this morning." The revelation sent a ripple of tension through the surrounding guards, several of them exchanging uneasy glances as the implications settled over the clearing. Damien's expression darkened considerably, his eyes narrowing as he processed the weight of this new information. "Names," Damien said, his voice hardening. Camille hesitated, glancing briefly toward Nathan, who watched her with barely restrained fury, understanding clearly that whatever leverage he had believed he still possessed was rapidly disappearing entirely. "I don't know all of them," Camille admitted, "but I know one. A guard assigned to the Eastern Wing, someone Nathan mentioned had been providing information about your estate's security measures for several months, well before our engagement was even formally announced." Damien turned toward Grace, who had arrived at the clearing only minutes earlier alongside additional reinforcements. "Review every guard assigned to the Eastern Wing over the past several months," he ordered. "I want a full accounting of anyone with access to those tunnels, cross-referenced against anyone who might have unexplained connections to Ashgrove territory." Grace nodded sharply and moved away immediately, already speaking urgently into her communication device as she coordinated the investigation that would clearly extend far beyond the events of this single morning. Nathan, watching his remaining options evaporate entirely, made one final desperate attempt to salvage some advantage from the collapsing situation. "This changes nothing," he said, though his voice lacked genuine conviction now. "You cannot prove any connection to me, beyond Camille's unsupported claims. My territory's council would never accept accusations, built on nothing more than the word of a woman who already proved herself capable of elaborate deception." "Perhaps not," Damien said calmly, "but your presence here, in my territory, attempting to threaten a woman under my protection, provides more than sufficient grounds to hold you accountable, regardless of what further evidence eventually surfaces." Nathan's expression hardened, though the guards surrounding the clearing left him with no viable path toward resistance or escape. Slowly, reluctantly, he raised his hands in a gesture of surrender, though the fury simmering behind his eyes suggested this defeat would not be the end of whatever conflict existed between the two territories. "You'll regret this," Nathan said quietly as Damien's guards moved forward to secure him. "I regret many things," Damien replied, his voice calm and unwavering, "but ensuring justice for those who conspire against innocent people will never be among them." As the guards led Nathan away, restrained and silent, Damien turned his attention to Camille, who stood at the edge of the clearing, her earlier composure entirely stripped away, replaced by something raw and exhausted. Mia watched the exchange carefully, uncertain what fate awaited the woman who had nearly succeeded in destroying everything Damien had built, yet who had also, in the end, provided information that might prevent far greater damage from occurring. "Your cooperation will be considered," Damien said quietly, "when the council determines what consequences you will face for your role in this conspiracy. But cooperation does not erase the danger you knowingly brought into my territory, nor the trust you deliberately betrayed." Camille nodded slowly, tears finally spilling freely down her cheeks, though whether from relief, regret, or simple exhaustion, Mia couldn't determine with any certainty. She said nothing further as the guards led her gently but firmly back toward the vehicles waiting at the edge of the clearing, her earlier plans for power and status having collapsed entirely into something far smaller and more uncertain. Once the clearing had emptied of guards, prisoners, and the immediate tension of confrontation, Damien turned toward Mia, his expression softening considerably from the hardened authority he had displayed throughout the standoff. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. Mia realized her hands were still trembling slightly, adrenaline slowly beginning to fade now that the immediate danger had passed. "I think so," she said. That was terrifying. You handled yourself remarkably well, Damien said, something like genuine admiration coloring his voice. Many people, faced with a situation like that, would have panicked entirely. I was terrified the entire time, Mia admitted honestly. As was I, Damien said quietly, surprising her with the admission. Fear does not disappear with power, Mia. It simply becomes something you learn to move through, rather than something that stops you entirely. Mia considered his words silently as they made their way back toward the waiting vehicles, the forest around them finally quiet and peaceful after the tension of the confrontation. Whatever remained ahead, whatever complications the discovery of Ashgrove's inside allies within Cross territory might bring, Mia understood with growing certainty that she had become far more deeply entangled in this world than she had ever anticipated when she had simply taken a temporary catering job to cover her rent. The days following the confrontation in the forest passed in a strange blur for Mia, caught somewhere between the ordinary rhythms of her old life and the increasingly complicated new world she found herself drawn into. She returned to her small apartment above the laundromat each evening, yet found herself unable to fully settle back into the routines that had once defined her existence entirely. Grace visited twice more that week, updating her on the investigation into the guards who had assisted Camille's escape. 3 individuals within the Eastern Wing had ultimately been identified as having accepted payment from Ashgrove sources over several months, providing information about security patterns and hidden passages in exchange for promises of future position within a territory they believed would eventually fall under Nathan's control. They've been detained, Grace explained during her second visit, sitting across from Mia at the small kitchen table in her apartment. Alpha Cross is handling their punishment personally, though I suspect it will serve as a clear warning to anyone else considering similar betrayals. And Nathan? Mia asked. Held under guard, awaiting a formal council hearing between territory representatives, Grace said. These matters move slowly when they involve accusations against another Alpha, but the evidence against him has grown substantial enough that few believe he will escape consequences entirely, regardless of how skillfully his allies attempt to defend him. Mia nodded slowly, processing the information with the same strange detachment that had colored much of the past week, as though she were watching these events unfold from a slight distance rather than living directly within them. And Camille? She asked finally. Grace's expression grew more careful. Her cooperation has been noted, and it will likely reduce whatever punishment she ultimately faces. But she will not be permitted to remain within Cross territory, nor will she return to any position of influence within Ashgrove lands, given her role in this entire conspiracy. Her future remains uncertain, though considerably less severe than it might have been had she refused to provide the information she offered in that clearing. The conversation drifted afterward toward lighter topics, Grace clearly attempting to ease some of the tension that had settled over Mia since the events of the gala, though Mia found her thoughts repeatedly drifting back toward Damien, toward the strange, impossible words he had spoken about a bond neither of them fully understood yet. She hadn't seen him since the day in the forest clearing, though Grace mentioned occasionally that he had been consumed entirely by the aftermath of the conspiracy, managing negotiations with allied territories, overseeing the investigation into the compromised guards, and preparing for whatever formal proceedings would eventually determine Nathan Ashgrove's fate. It was nearly 2 weeks later when Mia returned home from her regular shift at the diner to find a car waiting outside her apartment, sleek and understated, nothing like the grand vehicles she had seen at Cross Territory's estate. Damien himself stood beside it, dressed simply, none of the formal elegance he had worn during the gala evident in his casual attire, though his presence still carried the same undeniable weight it always had. You could have called, Mia said, though a small, unexpected smile tugged at her lips at the sight of him. I wanted to see you in person, Damien said. There's something I need to discuss, and I felt it deserved more than a simple phone conversation. Mia invited him inside, watching with quiet amusement as he took in her small, modest apartment, so entirely different from the grandeur of his own estate, though he showed no sign of judgment or discomfort, simply curiosity as he settled onto the worn couch near her window. How have you been? He asked. Strange, Mia admitted honestly. It's difficult to return to ordinary life after everything that happened. I keep waiting for someone to tell me it was all some elaborate misunderstanding. Damien's expression softened with understanding. I imagine that feeling will fade with time, he said. Though I confess, I have found myself thinking of you far more than I anticipated over these past 2 weeks. Mia's cheeks warmed slightly at his admission, and she found herself unable to look away from his steady gaze. I've thought about you too, she said quietly. About everything you told me, about this bond you believe exists between us. And what have you concluded? Damien asked carefully. Mia considered her answer thoughtfully before responding. I don't fully understand what any of it means, she admitted, but I know that since that night I haven't been able to stop thinking about you, about everything that happened, about whether the strange pull I felt in your study that morning was simply my imagination, or something far more significant. Damien rose slowly from the couch and crossed the small distance between them, stopping close enough that Mia could feel the warmth radiating from him, could see the careful restraint in his expression as he studied her face intently. I have never experienced anything like what I feel around you, he said quietly. Not with Camille, not with anyone throughout my entire life. It defies easy explanation, yet I cannot deny its presence, nor do I wish to any longer. Mia's heart pounded steadily as she absorbed his words, the weight of everything that had happened over the past several weeks settling into something that finally felt clearer, more certain than the confusion that had colored her thoughts since that first strange moment in his study. I'm frightened, she admitted honestly. Not of you, but of everything this could mean. Your world is so different from mine. I don't know the first thing about territories, alliances, or the responsibilities that come with being connected to someone like you. I don't expect you to understand it all immediately, Damien said gently. These things take time, patience, and willingness from both sides to build something meaningful together. I'm not asking you to become someone entirely different overnight. I'm simply asking whether you would be willing to explore what exists between us, at whatever pace feels comfortable to you. Mia studied his face carefully, searching for any hesitation or doubt in his expression, finding instead only quiet, steady sincerity that matched the growing certainty forming within her own heart. Whatever fear remained about the unknown complications ahead, she found herself unable to deny the pull she felt toward this man who had shown her, through every interaction since that terrifying night at the gala, a depth of character far beyond the intimidating reputation that had preceded him. I would like that, she said finally, her voice soft but certain, to explore whatever this is, together. Something shifted in Damien's expression at her words, relief and quiet joy blending together in a way that transformed his usually composed features into something warmer, more open than she had ever witnessed from him before. He reached out slowly, giving her every opportunity to step back if she wished, and gently took her hand in his own. Then let us begin, he said quietly, wherever this path leads us. Months passed, and the world Mia had once known as simple and small gradually expanded into something far richer and more complicated than she could have imagined on the night she first walked into that grand ballroom, carrying trays of chocolate truffles. The formal council hearing regarding Nathan Ashgrove had concluded weeks earlier, resulting in severe sanctions against his territory and a diminished position of authority that effectively neutralized the threat he had once posed to Crosslands. The guards who had betrayed their positions faced their own consequences, serving as a clear warning throughout the territory about the price of divided loyalty. Camille had relocated to a distant territory, far removed from both Cross and Ashgrove lands, her name carrying a quiet notoriety that would likely follow her for years to come, though the leniency shown for her cooperation had spared her from the harsher punishment Nathan ultimately faced. Mia herself had transitioned slowly, carefully, into the strange new world Damien inhabited, learning gradually about the customs, politics, and responsibilities that came with being connected to an Alpha King. She hadn't abandoned her old life entirely, still visiting her favorite diner occasionally, still checking in with Oliver, who had become something of an unlikely friend after witnessing the extraordinary events of that night alongside her. You look happy, Oliver observed one afternoon, when Mia had stopped by the diner during a rare quiet moment between her new responsibilities at Cross Territory. I am, Mia admitted, smiling faintly at the realization, terrified, still, more often than I'd like to admit, but happy. Terrified of what? Oliver asked, raising an eyebrow. Everything, Mia laughed. The politics, the expectations, learning an entirely new world most people never even know exists. But Damien has been patient. He hasn't asked me to become someone I'm not, or to abandon everything I valued before all of this began. Oliver studied her carefully, something thoughtful crossing his expression. You know, he said slowly, when you walked across that ballroom that night, I thought I was watching you make the biggest mistake of your life. You weren't entirely wrong, Mia said, smiling. It could have gone very differently. But it didn't, Oliver said, and now look at you, the waitress who saved an Alpha King, who exposed a conspiracy that could have reshaped 3 territories, who somehow found herself connected to one of the most powerful men in the entire region, all because she refused to stay quiet when something felt wrong. Mia considered his words thoughtfully, reflecting on how dramatically her life had shifted since that single decision to cross the ballroom floor despite every instinct screaming at her to remain silent and invisible. She thought about the courage it had taken, the fear she had pushed through, and the unexpected connection that had blossomed from a moment of simple, honest conscience. Later that evening, Mia returned to Cross Territory's estate, where Damien waited for her near the same fireplace where he had first revealed the truth about the bond connecting them. He rose to greet her, warmth evident in his expression, the intimidating reputation that had once made an entire staff tremble at his presence now replaced, in her eyes at least, by someone she had come to know as thoughtful, patient, and genuinely caring beneath the powerful exterior he presented to the wider world. "How was your visit to the diner?" he asked, settling beside her near the fire. "Grounding," Mia said. "It's good to remember where I came from, even as everything around me continues changing so quickly." "I never want you to lose that part of yourself," Damien said quietly. "The courage and honesty that first drew me toward you matters more to me than any title or position you might eventually hold within this territory." Mia smiled softly, leaning slightly into his side, comfortable now in a way that would have seemed impossible only months earlier, when she had stood trembling before him, uncertain whether her warning would be believed or dismissed entirely. "Do you ever think about what would have happened," she asked quietly, "if I had stayed silent that night?" Damien's expression grew thoughtful, considering the question seriously before answering. "Often," he admitted. "I would have lost everything my family built across generations, and worse, I would never have known you at all. Whatever difficulties remain ahead of us, whatever challenges this new world presents, I cannot imagine a version of my life that doesn't include the moment you found the courage to speak the truth, regardless of the risk it carried." Mia felt warmth spread through her chest at his words, understanding fully now the significance of everything that had unfolded since that terrifying night. She had walked into that ballroom as an anonymous waitress, easily overlooked, entirely unremarkable to the wealthy guests surrounding her. She had walked out of it as someone who had exposed a dangerous conspiracy, someone who had captured the attention and eventually the heart of one of the most powerful men in the region, someone whose simple act of honesty had rippled outward, reshaping the fate of an entire territory. Outside the window, the sun began setting slowly over the vast grounds of Cross Territory, casting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold, the same colors that had decorated the golden cake sitting innocently on its silver stand months earlier, before everything had changed so dramatically in the span of a single evening. Mia knew there would be challenges ahead, unfamiliar customs to learn, political complexities to navigate, and the ever-present awareness that danger could emerge again, from territories still resentful of cross-dominance. But sitting beside Damien in the quiet warmth of the fire, she felt something she hadn't experienced since childhood, a deep, settled sense that she had found exactly where she belonged, not through careful planning or ambition, but through the simple, unwavering choice to do what felt right, even when every instinct had urged her toward silence instead. 2 hours had changed everything that night at the gala, transforming an ordinary waitress into someone whose courage had altered the course of an entire territory's future. And as Mia settled deeper into the warmth beside the man she had once been warned never to approach, she understood with quiet certainty that this was only the beginning of a story far larger and more remarkable than she could have ever imagined for herself.